Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to dig into history and pull out those crucial truths that often get buried in the details.
That's the plan.
Today, we're looking at global change, but maybe not in the way you usually think about it. We're not starting with big political ideas or creeds.
No, we're looking at something much more fundamental, actually.
Exactly. Movement. The sheer ability to get from A to B. Our mission today is to really understand how basic technologies, the ones that let people move further, faster, well, how they became the real engines driving massive shifts in civilization.
Reshaping everything. Warfare, society, you name it. Across huge distances over long stretches of time.
It's kind of amazing, isn't it, how we often just gloss over things like, the wheel or harnessing the horse.
Oh, completely. We see them as just, well, background furniture for the ancient world. Props on a stage.
But when you actually pull together the scholarship, the primary sources of stuff you've gathered here, it just jumps out at you. The capacity to move quickly, to cover ground. It caused these enormous, almost disproportionate societal earthquakes.
Right. And the sources really hammer this home. Adopting new technology is never neutral. It's never just a convenient upgrade.
It actively, sometimes aggressively, changes the game. Military power, social hierarchies.
Even the biological fate of whole populations, as we'll see later, it's profound.
And that's the puzzle we want to unpack for you. Why do these seemingly simple tools trigger such huge, often violent transformations?
Well, I think it boils down to one word. Scale.
Explain that.
These tools let humans operate on a completely different scale. Ideas, goods, armies.
Yeah.
Suddenly, they can overcome the natural friction of geography and time. Things that used to be hard, slow, maybe impossible. Now they're feasible.
And our sources point to a specific cluster of inventions that really kicked this into high gear, especially after the agricultural revolution settled things down a bit.
You've got writing, metal tools, wheels, and then much later engines. These were the accelerators.
That sequence is interesting. Agriculture gives stability, more food, bigger populations.
But also new problems, right? Denser populations meant more disease, new social tensions. It wasn't a utopia.
And then along come these mobility technologies. The wheel, the horse.
And they don't solve those underlying problems. Instead, they give people the means to project those problems and their power over much larger areas.
So it facilitates both the good and the bad. Long-distance trade, definitely a plus.
But also mass conquest. Reaching enemies or potential subjects who were previously safe behind distance. It created this volatile, interconnected world much earlier than we might think.
So if technology is the accelerator pedal,
then mobility is the fuel.
Right. Let's get into how that fuel first started building the kinds of power structures we still grapple with today. Okay, let's start where organized, large-scale fighting really begins to take shape. This is where the raw power of speed just smacks you in the face.
We're talking about what you call the power cluster of the ancient world.
Yeah, the horse plus the wheeled vehicle. The chariot, basically.
This combination wasn't just an improvement. It fundamentally changed the arithmetic of battle. It allowed for actions on a scale and with a tactical flexibility that were simply impossible before.
And the Trojan War, even though it's wrapped in myth, gives us a really vivid picture of this.
Absolutely. If you look at the Iliad, the chariot isn't just a taxi dropping off heroes.
Right. Not an Uber for Achilles.
Exactly. It's the core platform for elite combat. It turns the nobility guys like Diomedes into mobile shock troops. Heavy hitters on wheels.
I remember that bit about Diomedes you pointed out. It's incredibly specific. He's using the chariot not just to get around, but to take on major enemies, like head-on, with focus.
But why the chariot? Why not just have the hero fight on horseback? What's the functional difference there? That's a good question.
It seems counterintuitive almost.
Well, think about stability and protection. A warrior on foot, or even trying to fight effectively from horseback in that era, is immediately caught up in the messy, exhausting scrum of the melee. The chariot, though, it's light, it's got this strong oak axle, 2 horses pulling. It's a delivery system. It brings your elite fighter, probably less tired, carrying his best gear.
Straight to the critical point on the battlefield.
Precisely. It lets someone like Diomedes aim his horses directly at a big target. The Iliad even has him going after Ares, the god of war. He can do that because the platform gives him the speed for the charge and a stable base to throw his spear from.
Wow. So it creates this huge tactical divide. The elite in the chariot, fast, stable, delivering force.
While the regular infantry are stuck in the slow, grinding part of the fight.
It's like the original fast attack vehicle. It provides that crucial momentum.
Exactly. Concentrated force, delivered at speed. Now take that tactical edge and imagine scaling it up.
Right.
Way up. to the level of running an empire.
Which brings us to the Persians and Xerxes.
Yes, moving away from myth now into something immense, almost unbelievable historically. The Persian Empire under Xerxes, and specifically the crossing of the Hellespont. If you want a case study in mobility defining imperial power, this is it.
The sheer logistics involved, moving that colossal army, all their supplies, servants, animals, across a major body of water. The sources make it sound almost impossible, even by modern standards.
It was an incredible feat of engineering and organization. Herodotus gives us the details. They built these massive pontoon bridges, and the crossing itself took 2 full days. 2 days of continuous movement.
And it wasn't just the number of soldiers, right? It was everything else that had to go with them.
Everything. The first day, you had the main infantry, all the cavalry crossing. The volume was so immense, they had the whole train of supply animals and servants using the other bridge at the same time. Just a constant flow of bodies and material.
You mentioned earlier, though, this wasn't just about moving troops efficiently. It was also a kind of performance.
Oh, absolutely. The performance of power. A ritualized demonstration for the whole world to see.
Why the need for pageantry in the middle of a military operation?
Because the goal wasn't just to get the army across. It was to visually, undeniably confirm Xerxes' right, maybe even his divine mandate to conquer. The sources say the first 10,000 Persians who crossed wore garlands, like a religious procession, but with tens of thousands of soldiers.
Okay, that's quite a statement.
And it continued. The second day, the horsemen, the elite troops, holding their spears point down, they also wore garlands. Then came the sacred horses, the empty sacred chariot.
The symbols of the empire's legitimacy.
Exactly. Followed by Xerxes himself in his own chariot, surrounded by his elite guard, the immortals, and thousands of cavalry. It was a carefully choreographed spectacle.
So the way they organized this massive, sustained movement over water, mixing military might with religious ritual, it sent a clear message.
A very clear message. To subject peoples to rival Greeks, this is the reach of Persian power. Geography doesn't stop us. We can project overwhelming force rapidly anywhere we choose. It basically turns the landscape from an obstacle into just a stage for their power.
But that ability, that scale and speed, it is a dark side, a very dark side.
Immediately. The capacity for projecting power like that translates directly into the capacity for mass destruction. Fast-moving forces can inflict devastating damage on settled societies before they can react. That's the brutal military advantage of mobility.
And we see this play out tragically during the Persian campaign in Greece itself.
A horrific example. Herodotus tells us that once the Thessalians showed the Persians the way, they just swept through Phocis.
Guided the barbarians, as Herodotus puts it.
Yes. And the description is chilling. They systematically destroyed everything, burned villages, cut down crops. This wasn't just hitting military targets. It was total war aimed at shattering the civilian population's will to resist. Burn the food, burn the houses.
They even targeted religious sites.
They did. Cities, sanctuaries, all set ablaze, including the very wealthy sanctuary and oracle at Abai. Nothing was spared.
But it's more than just property damage. The human cost described is appalling.
It forces you to confront the reality of what this kind of rapid invasion means. The sources are explicit about the pursuit of Phocian refugees into the mountains. Soldiers chasing down civilians, raping and killing women.
It's brutal.
The speed and scale of the Persian mobile forces allowed them to penetrate deep into territory and commit these atrocities quickly over a wide area. The defenders, the settled communities, simply couldn't coordinate fast enough to protect their non-combatants. The details make it stark. Mobility granted the invaders not just military superiority, but the power to inflict overwhelming psychological terror as well.
Okay, so the chariot showed the early power of combining the wheel and the horse. Fast forward many centuries, and the horse itself remains absolutely central, the key instrument of command and control.
And when you think of the ultimate mobile empire driven by the horse...
You have to think of the Mongols, Genghis Khan. Their entire way of war, their whole command structure, it was built around high mobility.
The Mongol war machine was, at its core, a mobility machine. That speed was everything. It let them strike before enemies could react, before warnings could even spread. And their organization was totally geared towards maximizing that speed advantage.
You mentioned the sources, like the secret history of the Mongols, referencing the 4 steeds. What's that about?
It's fascinating. It wasn't just literal, though commanders certainly had multiple horses. It was symbolic of their whole approach. A reference point for powerful, effective leadership and organization.
So not just logistics, but like an organizational philosophy. How did having 4 steeds embody their strategy?
It points to redundancy, speed, endurance. For a key commander or messenger, having multiple horses meant you could ride one until it was exhausted, jump onto a fresh one, and just keep going. Maximum speed, maximum distance, for days if needed.
Right, that allows your command and communication network to operate at a tempo that settled societies just couldn't possibly match.
Exactly. And that physical capability, that relentless speed, it permeated their whole culture. It led to this incredibly brutal, efficient approach to dominance. Conquest wasn't just about winning battles. It was about rapid, complete subjugation.
And that comes through loud and clear in those orders attributed to Chinggis Khan about the Tengut people.
Yeah, that's chilling stuff. He ordered his commanders to constantly talk about the destruction of the Tengut, to internalize it.
Using that phrase.
Maimed and tamed, they are no more. It wasn't just trash talk. It was an operational doctrine.
A mindset.
Completely. Their high mobility, the mounted archers, the swift command, enabled them to enforce that doctrine. Annihilate resistance physically, then erase them psychologically. All made possible by the horse, allowing them to project that single, brutal vision across an unbelievable expanse of territory.
Now, it's important to remember this kind of horse-powered mobility advantage wasn't just a Eurasian steppe phenomenon. We can see parallels centuries later in West Africa.
That's a great point. Look at the Songhay Empire, especially under Askia al-Hajj Muhammad. Huge territory.
And facing the same fundamental challenge, how do you maintain control from the center over vast distances?
The sources, like African dominion, paint a picture of a state that was almost constantly on the move. Askia's court, his central forces, they were itinerant. And crucially, they could shift to a war footing incredibly quickly, even while just traveling between towns.
A war footing, so always ready for combat.
Essentially, yes. Constantly prepared. What does that tell us about holding power in that environment?
It suggests that distance itself was the main enemy, the biggest threat to the empire's cohesion.
Exactly. The only effective counter to a rebellion popping up hundreds of miles away or an external raid was the credible threat of a rapid response force appearing seemingly out of nowhere.
So governors out in the provinces, the central army itself, they had to be perpetually ready to ride, ready to fight, instantly.
It was a core requirement. Mobility wasn't a bonus feature. It was the fundamental infrastructure holding the whole thing together.
So different continents, different centuries, Mongol steppe, West African savanna, but the same dynamic. Mounted, rapid movement dictates the tempo of keeping an empire intact.
But the horse wasn't only a practical tool for war and control. It also became deeply embedded in ritual, used to build and reinforce legitimacy.
Ah, right. This is where the technology moves beyond the purely functional and starts shaping culture itself.
It's how power gets cemented. If military speed concentrates power, then ritualizing that speed helps make that power seem natural, inevitable, even divinely ordained.
And the Gupta king, Samudragupta, in India, provides a powerful example.
The classic case. After his great campaign of conquest, the Digvijaya, the conquest of the quarters, he performed a massive, spectacular horse sacrifice, the Ashvamedha.
That sounds like more than just a religious ceremony. It sounds intensely political. How did sacrificing a horse renew kingship?
The Ashvamedha was an ancient, incredibly potent ritual directly linked to claiming territory. The basic idea was you'd consecrate a special horse and let it wander freely for a year.
Wandering where?
Wherever it chose, but usually guided subtly, and always protected by the king's warriors. Any local ruler or king who tried to stop the horse? Well, that was a direct challenge to the sponsoring king's paramount authority.
A declaration of war, essentially.
Pretty much. If the horse completed its circuit and returned unchallenged, it was symbolic proof that the king's dominion over that territory was absolute and accepted. The final sacrifice of that horse was the public spectacle, the massive affirmation. The land this horse wandered belongs to me.
Wow. So the horse, the very symbol and instrument of movement and conquest, literally maps out the boundaries of the king's power in real time.
Precisely. Samudragupta was reviving this ancient ritual which had apparently fallen out of use. He was deliberately linking his recent military victories, his Digvijaya, back to the oldest, most resonant symbols of legitimate Hindu kingship. The symbolic weight was enormous.
And we have actual physical evidence of this.
We do. Gold coins were issued specifically for Samudragupta's Ashvamedha. They depict the sacrificial horse, the queen participating in the ritual. And they carry this incredible inscription.
What did it say?
Something like, "After conquering the earth, the great king of kings, is now going to conquer the heavens.
That's ambitious.
Very. But it shows this amazing fusion. The physical reality of conquest through mobility of the horse becomes the vehicle for demonstrating political legitimacy, renewing ancient traditions, and even expressing aspirations of divine status. The technology shapes the ideology.
Okay, so we've seen mobility enable conquest and then legitimize it through ritual. This leads us to think about the value of things. These instruments, chariots, horses, they were obviously high value.
Which brings us to a really interesting point about value itself. It's tempting to just think, okay, supply and demand, right? Basic economics.
Sure.
But history, especially when you look at sources dealing with, say, the medieval period, shows it's much more tangled than that. The value of an object isn't just about how rare it is or how much it costs to make. It's deeply tied to the social context of how it's used, how it changes hands.
So social conditions shape value. How does that work in this context?
We'll take the horse again. On a purely economic level, its value is, the cost of breeding, feeding, training it, plus its scarcity.
Makes sense.
But socially, its value comes from what it enables. Conferring status on its rider, enforcing laws across distances, winning battles. And then when that same horse becomes the consecrated horse in the Ashvamedha,
its value skyrockets. But it's still the same horse.
Exactly. It hasn't materially changed. But its function has changed. Its role in the social and political system is transformed. It's moved from being just transport or a military asset to being a symbol of sovereignty itself. That revaluation based on social function is key.
And that kind of immediate, dramatic revaluation based on function seems different from how maybe later technological changes spread.
It does. Which brings us to the friction in how change actually happens. You'd think, logically, okay, someone invents a better plow or finds a more productive crop. Everyone should adopt it immediately, right?
Seems obvious. Better tech, better results.
But the source is looking at large, settled agrarian societies, like in much of Europe for centuries, show that major change was often incredibly slow, very localized.
Why, if the benefit is clear?
Deeply ingrained traditions, local customs, the cost of change, risk aversion, a lot of cultural inertia. The sources actually suggest that some of the biggest shifts in agriculture weren't driven by a brilliant new invention spreading organically.
No. What drove them then?
Often it was geopolitics, external pressures.
Wait, politics driving agricultural tech faster than invention? How?
It's a fascinating lesson in how systems respond to shocks. Take new industrial crops, sugar beets specifically, and new food crops like maize and potatoes in Europe. They made striking advances, as one source puts it.
Not because of a better seed drill?
No, but because of things like the Napoleonic Wars, and specifically Napoleon's continental system trying to block British trade. That included blocking British colonial cane sugar.
Ah, okay, so Napoleon cuts off the supply of a major commodity sugar, which relies on maritime mobility.
Right. And suddenly, European powers had to find alternatives. They were forced to invest heavily and rapidly in developing domestic substitutes, like sugar from beets.
So the political disruption, the blockage of mobility for one resource, created an urgent need that accelerated the adoption and development of another technology, another resource.
Precisely. The political pressure, the resource scarcity created by conflict, drove agricultural innovation and investment much faster than the slow, natural diffusion of a new farming technique might have. It shows how these global connections, often established by the very mobility tools we've been discussing, ships, armies can then trigger technological shifts when those connections are disrupted by conflict over resources.
Which brings us right back to that recurring theme, the unavoidable cost of progress. Every advantage seems to come with a catch.
It's a pattern that holds remarkably consistent. The scholar Lieberman pointed out how the shift to agriculture, way back, brought social problems along with the extra food. And we see that pattern just get amplified massively when global mobility becomes the driving force.
The ability to move things and people across the planet changes everything.
For better and for worse. The same technologies, the same networks that facilitate incredible trade and exchange. Tragically, they also facilitate mass conquest, exploitation, and even unprecedented biological catastrophe.
And perhaps the most devastating example of that downside, that coupling of mobility and disaster, comes after Columbus, the opening up of the Atlantic world.
It's almost impossible to overstate the impact, especially the unseen mobility, the movement of pathogens. Germs. Early accounts often focus on, European guns and steel. But the deeper analysis reflected in the sources we have makes it clear The collapse of Native American societies, while they were absolutely fighting for their own futures, was overwhelmingly driven by their catastrophic lack of immunity to Old World diseases. Diseases that arrived as invisible passengers on those European ships.
Let's try and grasp the scale of that. The demographic numbers are just staggering.
They really are. We need to understand the starting point. The best current estimates suggest the population in the Americas, the whole hemisphere back in 1491, was somewhere between 90 and 112 million people.
More people than lived in Europe at the time.
Significantly more.
Yeah.
A vast, complex network of societies, and then suddenly, catastrophic exposure. The result. The sources indicate that the epidemics that swept through in the century or so after contact killed somewhere between 80 and 100 million indigenous people.
80 to 100 million.
Yeah.
It's almost unimaginable. A demographic collapse driven purely by the new global mobility.
It's the ultimate tragic example of technology in this case. Shipbuilding and navigation enabling transatlantic voyages being profoundly non-neutral.
And even after the initial shockwaves of disease, the economic changes driven by this new global mobility continue to be deeply disruptive and exploitative.
Absolutely. Think about the rise of the Cotton Kingdom in the 19th century United States.
Fueled by the Industrial Revolution's hunger for raw materials.
Exactly. And what did that economic engine rely on? The forced mobility and exploitation of human beings through chattel slavery.
So the mobility of goods on ships, the speed of new industrial machines in British factories, it created this insatiable demand that directly drove the expansion and intensification of slavery in America.
Precisely. As cotton cultivation pushed relentlessly westward, enabled by new lands and driven by global markets, the number of enslaved people exploded, reached 3.2 million by 1850. The key insight from the sources here is that slavery wasn't some backward, isolated, peculiar institution separate from the modern economy.
No, it was deeply integrated.
It was fundamental, an integral, dynamic part of the rise of industrial capitalism, a system maintained by the forced mobility of labor and the efficient mobility of raw cotton across the Atlantic. It was all connected.
And you see a similar pattern technology enabling a new scale of production, which then reshapes labor and society happening within the industrial sector itself in America.
Right. Samuel Slater brings industrial spinning technology to New England, sets up early factories. But the real leap forward, the sources suggest, was the introduction of the power loom around 1814.
Why was the power loom such a game changer?
Because it allowed for the integration of all the textile manufacturing processes, spinning and weaving under one roof, in one large factory.
Which means concentrating the workforce.
Massively. It created this huge demand for cheap labor, pulling thousands of workers, mostly young women, into these new centralized factory towns. New textile mills shot up everywhere.
And with that concentration of labor comes new dynamics.
New forms of exploitation, certainly. We're talking grueling conditions,
Yeah.
12, 16-hour days, abysmal wages. 80 to 90% of the workforce in many mills were women.
But that very concentration, that forced proximity created by the technology, it also created the conditions for something else.
Resistance, organization. When you bring thousands of people together under shared difficult conditions, they start to talk. They start to organize.
So the technology that enabled mass production also inadvertently enabled mass organization.
It laid the groundwork for it. The first known strike by women factory workers in the U.S. happened in Pawtucket, Rhode Island in 1824. They were protesting wage cuts and longer hours. It shows how quickly the new system, built on technology and centralized labor, generated its own opposition.
And they formed organizations.
Yes. Groups like the Female Labor Reform Association emerged. They weren't just complaining, they became a political force. They campaigned for better conditions, shorter hours. They even managed to defeat a state legislator who had dismissed their concerns, saying labor conditions couldn't be improved.
That's incredible. It shows that technology doesn't just create new ways to work or exploit. It inherently creates the potential for new ways to organize and push back. That seems to be an enduring dynamic driven by mobility and centralization.
And you see that same spirit, that same refusal to accept the technologically enforced power structures, even within the horrific system of chattel slavery itself. Look at the powerful arguments made by formerly enslaved people who gained their own mobility, like J.W. Logan and Frederick Douglass.
Logan's response to his former enslavers is just devastatingly clear, isn't it? They claim they'd raise you as we did our own children.
And Logan just cuts right through that hypocrisy, a hypocrisy enabled by the system that treated people as mobile property. He shot back. Woman, did you raise your own children for the market? Did you raise them for the whipping post? It's a fundamental challenge to the morality of a system based on owning and moving human beings. He basically says, if you deny my right to liberty, you forfeit any right to claim ownership over me.
And Frederick Douglass, using mobility, his freedom, gave him his powerful voice, his intellect. He hammered this point home on, of all days, the 4th of July.
Yeah, using the nation's own celebration of freedom to expose the grotesque contradiction at its heart.
What did he ask?
He asked famously, "What to the American slave is your 4th of July?" And his answer just rips away any pretense. Your celebration is a sham, your boasted liberty an unholy license, your denunciation of tyrants' brass-fronted impudence.
He saw the whole structure.
The entire nation, built partly on the immense wealth generated by this system of forced human mobility and exploited labor, he saw it as fundamentally barbaric. A revolting barbarity, he called it. It drives home the point. Whether it's the speed of a Mongol horseman or the speed of cotton moving through global supply chains, mobility and technology consistently concentrate power, generating immense wealth for some and often immense suffering for others.
So we've covered a lot of ground today. Thousands of years, really, from, a simple wooden axle on a Bronze Age chariot.
All the way to the intricate global supply chains driving the Cotton Kingdom and the Industrial Revolution.
And the connecting thread seems clear. The history of the wheel, the horse, rapid movement in general. It's inseparable from the history of how power gets concentrated, how military wins turn into imperial legitimacy, how economic potential gets unlocked or exploited.
That ability to act quickly, at scale, it really seems to shape the path of history.
Which leads us to think about today. Because our capacity for rapid action, for widespread influence, it's not just amplified compared to ancient times, it's amplified maybe 1,000-fold, right? Whether it's physical speed or the speed of information and capital.
And that shifts the fundamental challenge, doesn't it? It's less about what we can achieve with our technology because the possibilities seem almost limitless now. The critical question becomes how we manage that incredible power, ethically, politically.
It reminds me of Machiavelli. He was grappling with concentrated power in his own time, Renaissance Italy. And he had that famous piece of advice for the prince.
Inspire fear, but avoid hatred.
Exactly. And his core rule for avoiding hatred, keep your hands off people's property and their basic security. He said, basically, men forget the death of their father quicker than they forget losing their inheritance. It was a call for a certain kind of restraint, even for a ruler focused on power.
But that kind of restraint feels harder, maybe, when the technology allows acquisition and exploitation to happen so fast, so easily, and often, so far away from the people making the decisions. The consequences feel distant.
Yeah, and maybe that's where a different kind of thinking comes in, like the Stoics. Marcus Aurelius, writing about governing an empire, kept insisting that real power, real control, starts internally.
Within the ruler or within ourselves.
Right. He talks about needing to constantly, wipe away biased opinions, control unreasonable desires, and ultimately love mankind, obey God. Basically, the immense power to affect the world demands immense self-discipline and ethical grounding.
The power to move the world requires the wisdom to restrain ourselves.
Yeah.
It's a powerful thought.
So here's the final thought we want to leave you with, the learner. Given that our ability to act fast, to acquire, to influence, is magnified incredibly by modern technology, what virtues, what principles, what kinds of governance do we need as individuals, as societies, to make sure this power serves the common good?
How do we prevent it from becoming just a tool for mass exploitation on an unprecedented scale? How does our civilization avoid becoming like that tyrant Machiavelli warned about, powerful, feared, but ultimately despised?
The tools change dramatically. A horse-drawn chariot defined an ancient empire. A global financial algorithm can define wealth and poverty today.
But the fundamental need for wisdom, for collective ethical reflection, for restraint, that seems absolutely constant. It's a deep dive that forces us to look inward at our own principles just as much as we look back at history.